Só preciso de lugar pra ficar. Posso passar a noite aqui?
A dona Diana falou que vocês estão precisando de uma pessoa.
Que tipo de serviço você faz?
A tropical take on film noir, Motel Destino is set on the sun-bleached shores of northeastern Brazil. Karim Aïnouz has returned to his home state for this luminous, erotic thriller which premiered in competition at this year's Cannes Film Festival. The filmmaker joins us in the studio to tell us more. Karim, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Very happy to be here.
Now, your film, Motel Destino, sees a young man, Geraldo, as we saw, seek refuge at a love hotel. Let's say it's the place you'd go for a few hours, maybe not a whole night. There have been some iconic hotels or motels in cinema over the years. You've got the Bates Motel in Psycho, the Overlook Hotel in The Shining. What is it about that hotel setup that makes a good cinematic framework?
It's true. I was very much inspired when I began this movie by those two examples you just gave. And I think that there's a possibility that you can, there are normally places, at the edge of roads, kind of far away. And I think there are places that you can do anything you want inside. There's a sense of there are no limits. And I think that allows us to fantasize, that allow us to play, that allow us to do things we would never do in public. So I think that there is a sense also of danger. And I think all these elements are really kind of juicy for a story. And I think it's not an accident that these places have been used so much. I think you can be something else when you arrive there. You start from zero, And I think that sense of reinventing yourselves is something that's always exciting for a character.
And there's definitely a sense of danger.
And it's also a place of hiding. It can also be a place of hiding because especially the motels in Brazil, there are places that you go and you'll never be seen. You go into a private garage, you close the door, nobody sees your car, and then you go out, you close the windows of your car, and then, you're completely incognito. So I think it's also a place of hiding that I think it's also good when you think of the plot of particularly a noir.
Anonymity. Well, let's take a look at the film. Here's a short clip featuring two of the central trio, Elias and Geraldo.
E o teu pai?
O que quer saber do meu pai? Ele era pescador, mano. Dizer que ele morreu no mar, mas minha mãe nunca acreditou, não. Ele sabia nadar desde criança. O conhecido disse que viu uma pessoa muito parecida com ele em São Paulo, vendendo breguete na 25 de março.
Que destino teu, hein? Vivendo sozinho, sem pai nem mãe.
So we see the coast of Céara, your home state in the northeast of Brazil. You filmed there before in 2014 for Futuro Beach.
Yeah.
These are breathtaking locations. They could be presented as idyllic beaches. But as we see in that clip, people are quite interested in the big cities in the south of Brazil. And there's almost something a bit bleak about these empty landscapes. Do you think that is a reflection of the social reality there?
Yeah, I think it is. I think in a sense, these are places that have been forgotten for decades and centuries even. The northeast of Brazil is a place that's been very isolated, it's very desertic, it's very dry, it's very hot, and it's very sort of empty. And I think that they are actually quite evocative for a film, and particularly on this film. And there's this, and the reason I say this is because there is lots of small cliffs, throughout this coast. And I think there's something quite dramatic about these places that I think it's too bad. I mean, it's sad that it's not being used as many times because of most of the films made in Brazil are in the south and southeast of Brazil. But I think these places are really, there's a bleakness, but there's also a possibility of looking ahead. Like it's always, whenever you're born in the north of Brazil, I have the feeling like when we look at the sea, we're looking what's beyond the horizon, And I think for the story of this film, it was really great. And for Futuro Beach as well, the movie you mentioned that I did in 2014, there's always a sense of what's behind the horizon. So there's a sense of dreaming as well that I think it's kind of the opposite of bleakness, But I think it's there because there's very little trees. It's a lot of dunes, and there's a sort of sense of emptiness that I think allows you to dream as well.
The future or destiny, perhaps.
Yeah.
And I noticed that in this film, some of those very cliched gender dynamics have been reversed. For example, there's a mob boss who's a woman, and there's a young man, Geraldo, who's an object of desire. Is this your way of sort of rewriting the codes of genre films like film noir?
Yes, listen, I was really interested on how do we bring that tradition, which is very exciting for me as a tradition, that it's very timely because it talks about I mean, when the noir started in America particularly, it was very much post-war, and I think there was a sense of fragmentation and characters being very broken. But still, it was a very male kind of gaze that was very present at the time, and I think the idea of the femme fatale, the idea of the femme fatale as the object of desire and not a man, and also the idea that the main character are already sort of male, kind of very big heroes. And I think for me it was very interesting to understand what would those characters be today. And I also was very interested in making a movie where the dynamic between the villain and the antagonist, the protagonist, the villain, would be a bit more, with more shades of grey.
Well, if we look back at your previous fiction films, there have often been elements of toxic masculinity, whether it's in Tudor England, in Firebrand, or 1950s Brazil in Invisible Life.
Yeah.
And now in the present day in Motel Destino. When it comes to this sort of macho culture, do you see any progress on that?
Listen, it's funny because I think this is my 12th feature film, and I think when I first started, I was really, and I am still interested in female characters, but I think lately I've been really fascinated by this sort of kind of men, but normally very toxic and very kind of dangerous. And I think that it's something that's been really in my mind, because I think that we're living in a moment that there are so many of them, and there's so much out there, you know. So I think that it's something that it's really taken over the work I've been doing. You know, it's something that I think started with Invisible Life very much, you know, with the character of Antenor. And I think on Firebrand, you know, it was a king, sort of this kind of very toxic king, a monster really. And then with Motel Destino, it's a more nuanced male character. So I became very curious to understand what's the fascination. And it's funny because I just shot a new movie, and it's also about a very toxic father in the case of this one. So I think it's something that's been haunting me.
And in the film, we get a glimpse of some of the violence that has sadly become a feature of life in some parts of Brazil, whether it's armed robbery or domestic violence.
Yeah.
What would you say the root of that violence is, and is there a way out of it?
Listen, I think the root of that violence, I think for me, I see it in two ways. I think it's the concentration of wealth, and I think that's happening a lot around the world. I think that's the biggest issue that I think we need to address, and the disparity between the rich and the poor. But really, I do think that the violence that we face in Brazil, it has to do that I don't think we've ever really done our work of abolishing slavery. I think that there is you know, remnants of that I think are very present in daily life, and there's anger, and there is resentment, and there is a sense of justice that needs to be made, and I think that really kind of contaminates the public space. And what's interesting for me on Motel Destino is that a lot of the deaths happen outside of the motel, you know, and the public space is really sort of an arena of conflict. And that for me was fascinating because, again, it's shot in these beautiful beaches and in this wonderful place. But I do think that, you know, a lot of the public spaces in Brazil are still tinted with the undoing of what has been done, you know, for so many years.
And I mentioned a few of your previous films, very eclectic mix. You've got a historical film set in Rio, a very personal, slightly political documentary which takes you to the mountains of Algeria, where some of your family are from. Recently, a big budget costume drama starring Jude Law, Alicia Vikander. You don't seem to be stuck on one style, one place. I know you've just wrapped a film. What's next for you?
Yeah, listen, I'm first of all, I'm always looking to have fun. I think like filmmaking is such a privilege, and I'm always thinking it needs to be, for me, it's almost like traveling. It needs to be a new adventure. So I'm also thinking that I'm always learning. So I think there's not, you know, a point of like repeating myself. I think that, you know, when that start to repeat yourself, you become quite boring. But more than anything, I think I'm really excited about new characters. Like I don't have kids, but I think my kids are somehow my characters. And I'm really excited to sort of actually be the person who is going to, you know, give a stage to that character. And I think every character needs a different stage. Every character needs to be told different. It's like a painting. I do think that there might be things that that you can trace if you're going to look closer, but it doesn't really matter for me. I think what's exciting is that every movie, you know, I didn't go to film school, and I think I also see every movie as a possibility of exploring things I haven't done. And I think it is eclectic, but you know, I am eclectic, you know, like I'm somebody who was born in a place, from parents that were born in different other places, that have been living in different places in the world. So I embrace very much the sort of lack of sort of coherent formality in the films. And I think for me, it's always important that one thing that's super important is the films have always a certain electricity, that they have a life and they can have a breathing of their own. But I think this idea of formal coherence and like the themes that repeat themselves, it feels a bit anachronic as well. I think it's coming from this tradition of like haute cinema where there is a line, you know. I think I'm not interested in a straight line. I'm interested in a more kind of messy line.
Well, finally, we asked you what's on your cultural radar. You pointed us in the direction of an exhibition which is on in Berlin, where you live, by legendary photographer Nan Goldin. What is it that you love about her photos?
Listen, I was blown away when I first saw her work. I lived in New York for many years, I think between 1988 and 2003, and I witnessed the AIDS pandemic or epidemic, you know. I think they were really, really horrible times. And I've never actually been brave enough to look in the eye of what's happened. And I think that the way that Nan documented that time, it was the first way I came into contact with her work. And I think there was a sense of empathy, but yet a sense of beauty that I thought was breathtaking. And I think since then, every time I begin to shoot a movie, I come to my, production design and I say, into my DOP as well, and I say, listen, this is what I'd love to do, because the sense of capturing intimacy that she does, which is extraordinary. And so this is how I fell in love with her. And then the second thing that I really fell in love with in Goldin was the way that she presents the work sometimes. It's a slideshow, and for me, it's the purest form of cinema. It's like storytelling with like still frames. And I was really fascinated once on a show of hers that I sort of walked through the slideshow. So for me, when I saw this show in Berlin now, it was particularly haunting because I think she lived in Berlin. I moved to Berlin to do a residency good 20 years ago. And I think 10 years before I went, she did the same residency. So I think there was a sense of like the work. It's not her home. Her home is the US and New York, but there was a sense of seeing the work at home. And I think that was really, really moving to me.
Very powerful images from Nan Goldin.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for the tip, and thanks for joining us today, Karim.
Oh, thank you.
We'll leave you with a glimpse of that exhibition, Nan Goldin, This Will Not End Well, at the Stadtlich Museum in Berlin. Do remember to check in with us here on Arts 24 next time for more arts and culture. There's more news coming up just after this.